Hello. I'm here with my social study teacher, Nate. And first off, could you introduce yourself? What is your role in Newport, and what is the subject that you teach?
My name's Nate Wong-Heffter. I teach this year AP US History and AP American Government. Newport to mostly 11th and 12th graders.
How have you seen technology impact education over the years you've been teaching?
Yeah, quite a bit. So I've been teaching since before cell phones were an ever-present part of like student life, before computers made their way into daily work, before email was commonly used with students. So like it's sort of, technology is such a big word, but like the digitized technology that we sort of use that word to me now has woven its way into pretty much every aspect of the work that a student does and that a teacher does.
I'm gonna take out my phone as use as the microphone.
Oh, that's a good idea. And I said that I was gonna record mine just because it's good practice too. Are you all done?
Maybe one or two meetings, we can definitely talk about very quickly on how we hire technology.
I think the best way to do it is to learn, like, do it.
We both probably bring back up the QB.
That's true, a lady kind of.
I think that'll be useful.
Good buttons.
Maybe on the table.
Hi, are you even on this one? It's really cool.
So we're gonna continue. So are you familiar with the concepts of generative AI, and could you explain what it means to you in your own words?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe myself as highly tech literate or sort of on the cutting edge of stuff. So for me, generative AI infers something that is being organically created using sort of machine learning based on big data sets and a training process that has taught the machine how to make its way through those data sets, recognize patterns of association, and then create something that is organically, generally based on a stimulus or a prompt, organically coming about as a result of that calculation.
Do you conceive the introduction of generative AI to students as being very different from as your cell phones were first introduced to students?
Yeah, categorically. I mean, I think cell phones have so many different aspects to them in terms of what they're in the learning environment, what they give access to. So clearly as like a distractor, that it shows up. But I think AI changes the game in terms of technology because it's able to perform the thinking task that we are trying to teach students how to do and refine and improve upon. So it's not simply showing up as a disruptor to what we're doing in class. It's directly replacing some of the learning challenges that we're trying to
undergraduate labs, students
create, but also creating, opportunities for work tasks that haven't existed before. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, but I do think that it's categorically different than even than access to the internet. Sort of like we moved beyond the idea that learning was about rote knowledge quite a while ago, and because the internet sort of like destroyed that idea of memorized as king. But there still was this distinction between what are you able to do with knowledge?
In the beliefs of the Latter-day Saints movement, this man was the mortal form of the
that like technology previously wasn't able to effectively replicate.
In Islam,
So,
it was banished from
do you
heaven for
currently
using the vow
implement
of
any
sin.
aspects of
Then
AI in your
Allah
teachings?
said,
And
"Allah's
if
son,
so,
he
how are you
murdered."
using them?
If
If
you
not,
think
are you
there's
planning
some
to incorporate AI into any part of your curriculum?
I mean, I don't think that. I'm not one who wants to like hold the line against AI
you can
perpetually in any way. I think that I don't have any insight how to use it in a way that maximizes its benefit without introducing some really clear detriments. So currently, I'm pretty hesitant to introduce it in any instructional way. I'm still just dabbling with it in my own like sort of outside of teaching life, and as well as dabbling with it in terms of my own work in preparation for teaching. So I mean, it is there in my, like, you know, students might not see it front and center as like, oh, ChatGPT or some other AI tool was involved in this, but it's there already. But in terms of bringing it front and center to the student work, I'm more hesitant than I am excited.
We talk about how AI is like a double-edged sword. It has some potential benefits and also detriments they mentioned. So let's talk about benefits first. What are some benefits that you foresee that could come with incorporating AI into students' curriculum?
I mean, the thing that stands out to me is like, once there's a lot of tasks that once you know how to do them are unnecessarily time consuming that AI can simplify. So, you know, what that means is an increase in I don't know, like accessing larger volumes of information to bring to bear on a question. That seems like only good in the sort of scheme of, if we're going looking for answers to questions, the broader our information set
I know, I think people get.
makes sense. And so long as we know how to
Genuinely something that.
identify good versus bad information, more information is good.
I can't.
And so I think AI, I'm most enthusiastic about the idea that AI can open up access to larger data sets.
Because like, there's like famous people that like people actually.
I think
Did you guys know like famous like actors?
I think it can also transition known skills into unfamiliar places. So I'm just gonna make something up, but like the idea that a student learns through a lot of repetition how to write an essay in a class, but maybe doesn't learn how to write a song. And AI can like close the loop on that of like, if you can present the information that's at the background of an argument and then transition it into something that feels like a more creative outlet, that sounds fun. So long as the learning objective isn't learn how to write a song, it opens up, you know, space to explore the consequence of the learning objective. I think most students would think that like learning to write an essay just prepares you how to write an essay. If they don't see that like learning to write an essay, you know, teaches you how to organize your thinking, how to structure a logical conclusion, and that is something that has value in a lot of different formats of learning. I see AI as helping to transition knowledge that students have into new areas somewhat effectively, or like I see the potential there.
So there are several things that you brought up, including like AI could possibly replace students doing some of the repetitive works. AI being able to provide a wider spectrum of information and to transform students' previous learning into a new field of learning. But with these, what are some concerns that you see with the incorporation of the AI? What are some skills that a student might lack by using AI to replace them to do the repetitive works?
Yeah, I think that
currency symbolized by gold
a task well done and then done multiple times is a good thing. A task poorly done and then done multiple times is a bad thing. And so I think it has the potential to create compoundingly consequences to students who don't actually know how to do the task that they are asking AI to do. How to recognize it when the AI has done it in a way that's not yet good or
So-
reliable.
So like students need to establish their standards and they need to know how to judge if a content is well established, is complete before they can use AI to replace doing the repetitive work for them.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I would hesitate to say that it's like an objective standard that they're working towards. Like, I've used AI to help me sort of rough draft student letters of recommendation because, you know, I write 30 or so of those a year, and it's entirely effective for me to say, you know, write a basic letter that highlights a student who has these 3 attributes and is applying to programs that focus on, you know, these particular goals. And that will give me what reads like a very, very generic letter of recommendation, as if I don't even know the student. And then I'll take that and sort of like replace things and change the language and make it actually reflect on the relationship I have with that student. And at the end of the day, like, I spend less time writing that letter than I would have if I had just been like started from scratch. And but if I didn't know how to take the generic and make it specific, or I didn't even recognize the benefit of the more specific, and I just mailed out letters, I would be doing actual damage to student applications in that regard. And so I think that, like, because there is oftentimes an incentive for students to just get work done, points in the grade book, time spent, all that sort of stuff, you have to anticipate that students will look at AI as a potential shortcut of the process that is essential to their learning, not simply as a shortcut for repetitive tasks. So I would like to go back to your question of like, if it's preceded by establishing student skills and then letting them use AI, I can imagine it being powerful. I don't know how that, though, like the establishment of student skills is overwhelmingly what I spend my time on in class. I don't feel like over the course of the year, I ask students to do the same skill over again. So it almost feels like here is where you're learning how to do that thing. Out there in the world is where you use AI to do it again, but not necessarily on the next assignment that you're doing in this class.
The various projects, I think they definitely help to establish students' awareness of how to do something the right way. And using AI might just be giving them a quick template or a sample. Yeah, I totally get your point that students might just use those as shortcuts and turn them in, but not actually are responsible for their own learning.
Yeah. Well, that's so the AI that I've been able to identify that was turned in, it generally has stood out so distinctly as not in the student's voice and not generally not saying anything of great worth. Like, it's just sort of like
Generalized.
Yeah, well, you know, if I were to humanize it, it's talking as if it knows what it's talking about, but it's not saying anything particularly meaningful. And you know, it's alarming when a student who has been through all of the instructional things then takes the shortcut and turns in something that is in defiance of all of those instructional things, because they've just basically trusted that the technology is smarter than they are. I don't know how many times students have used AI for their schoolwork in the way that I use it for letters of recommendation. Frankly, I'm not too concerned about that, because if they can take whatever they're given and make it read to me as authentically of their voice and demonstrating, you know, an understanding, you know, like that's good enough. like, I guess that raises the question of what happens 4 years from now when AI has improved so much that the answers it gives are just much better than the ones that it now. But for the time being, I'm not too concerned with the students who are smart enough to look at an answer and say, that's not quite right, let me make it better. Because if they know what better is, they've learned.
We're definitely gonna come back to this part slightly later in the interviews about how to better implement the AI as it evolves and as the technology improves. But right now let's talk about intellectual properties. So how do you determine like how the intellectual properties are assigned if a student uses AI in their process, in their
That's interesting. I generally think of intellectual property as being really, really important when there's a financial exchange, when somebody's profiting from the work that somebody else has done. In the instructional space, so much of the stuff I do with students to help teach is the product of work done by other teachers over the years. And and my work has gone out. And so like ownership of an idea is much less important to me because I feel like when we're in an educational space, it's really important to borrow ideas and to test those ideas and to not get too hung up on who is responsible for having had this idea first. And so at least my initial take on this question is not really like the intellectual property is less important. Now, if students are selling, essays that are created by AI, all of a sudden there's like a financial exchange. And like, I don't know, I just feel like that's a question that isn't really within my domain of what I'm trying to do each day. It doesn't interfere with it. There's probably other ways to think about that question, but that's what comes to mind immediately for me.
Divergent play boundaries make muscle structures spreading.
what comes to you as the most important things for a student doing work? Like if they use this AI in the process, but it is not their idea that matters the most. What would you say is the most important part for the student to demonstrate their learning and their logistical thinking?
I guess it really depends on what the task is. And so much of what I teach is about critical analysis of sources or critical evaluation of arguments or constructing persuasive arguments. And so it's much less important to sort of say like, I have the idea that the Civil War was actually caused by economic disagreements rather than by moral arguments over slavery. It's like, that's not a new idea, but if like somebody sort of came up with it, sort of like, this is what I think it was. We haven't done the stuff that is US history at that point. Like I could go into ChatGPT and sort of type like, write me an essay describing why economic causes were more powerful than moral causes in the rise of the Civil War, and it'll come up with some stuff. The generation of that starting argument is not really success or failure. It's just where we begin. And so it's what comes next that needs to be like, is a person presenting information accurately? Are they taking the time to explain why that information is important in the context of the argument that's being made? Are they addressing concerns that other people might have about the argument that they're making? Are they qualifying it by sort of acknowledging that it doesn't extend in each situation, or to other groups a better argument exists? Like those are the sort of nuances of argumentation. No doubt AI can replicate it, but it's a logic sequence that students are supposed to be able to develop for themselves. And so it's like the ability to do that sequence is the important thing, not to come up with it all on their own.
I think this take is a pretty unique perspective that I've heard from. That might be coming from the fact that social study is a pretty analysis heavy subject. So the learning is more framed around how the students frame their argument, how they support it. So I can definitely see where that point is coming from.
Well, I think it's also like just the practical reality that like when we talk about education, like teachers can be really idealistic about the sort of like metacognitive processes that students are undergoing. But in a practical sense, we're teaching public school, we're teaching rooms of 28 students, and like we don't get to spend all that much time working with the particulars of what's trying to understand what's going on inside a student's head. We're handed a stack of essays to grade. And so in the practical sense, AI is a disruptor because it makes it so difficult for us to know what is worth our time and what is just an absolute waste of our time. Because it's not easy, unless it clearly demonstrates that the student who submitted it didn't even know enough about the task to recognize that what they did was poor quality. If it doesn't have that hallmark, then the teacher's probably not going to catch it. And then it's just sort of like a frustrating, students are getting in the way of the efforts to properly identify what they need and give them support to help them get there.
So to you as a teacher in a very big public school, does the potential usage of AI by students increase your barrier to teaching because you have to put in more efforts in telling if a certain work is produced by the students or by
100% if they're not being upfront about it. I mean, I think if a student says, I'm using AI for this part, that's a really helpful thing because it allows me to say, like, well, do you recognize that this part is not very good? Or it could be built in. Because if they do, again, I'm like, great, like use it as a tool for that. But it hasn't been my experience that students are enthusiastically thinking about AI as a tool to help them in their learning. It's been my experience that it's much more of like AI is a tool to reduce the time necessary to complete tasks.
But to you, it would be acceptable for students if they clearly cite the usage of AI in helping them to complete a certain part of their work.
Yeah, I mean, I think then we could have an open dialogue and conversation around what AI gets credit for and what the student is claiming credit for. I don't think that it has much of any role in an assessment, because an assessment is supposed to be the demonstration of learning. There's a lot of class activities that are not assessments where AI can be a helpful tool. But again, it's increasing the impact. And so if it's a knowledgeable, deployment of knowledge, then it's going to be a good tool. It's going to get better stuff. Because students are generally on a learning curve, you got to anticipate that a lot of students aren't going to be aware that it's taking them down a path that is not highly desirable. It's going to take them down that path much more rapidly because it's going to. I don't know. I think I'm feeling like I'm being too abstract here, but I feel like it has the potential to introduce some like air of authenticity and certainty because it's pulling from lots of sources. I mean, like Perplexity is one that like cites where in the internet the answer is deriving its dominant generation from. And so that then comes across as a very authoritative thing to base faith in because it's like citing its sources. I've had Perplexity make stuff up and cite its sources. Like it just could not have been more wrong. And like it didn't strike me as wrong. It seemed entirely plausible, but then when I went and sort of checked a few of the sources, I learned that it was completely making things up. So I had to take that extra step, and I don't know how I would construct lessons where I could have faith that students would be taking that extra step for their own benefit. if there was some point benefit or even time benefit to be gained from just taking it.
So let's go to where let's talk about constructing lessons or the constructing curriculum for students, because as the trend as technology is evolving, it's essentially unstoppable for them to kind of get into people's life and for people to use them. So for you, how would you adapt your curriculum or lessons, or what are some potential ideas that you have to kind of embrace
Yeah,
the technology?
and that's where I go back and sort of say, like, I'm not really rapidly looking to like create opportunities for it because I have such a strong hesitancy. And so I can think of just 2 occasions last year where I said, this might be a good thing for you to try to use AI on and see what it comes up with. And I didn't even follow through on either of those, just saying, let's evaluate how helpful that was. Let's have a conversation about AI, but just sort of like move past that task and say, okay, what have you got? That's what we're moving forward with. So
Could you explain those scenarios for a bit?
yeah, so they were both scenarios where effectively I was at like encouraging students to use AI to help them with brainstorming.
Brainstorming.
Trying to remember one. One had to do with a project where they were it's like after the AP exam where students are doing researching films that depict certain moments in history. And so just sort of like, rather than Googling, movies about World War II, using AI to
As a search engine.
yeah, as a search engine, but also to be a little bit smarter about the search engine. So films that depict, female soldier, female nurse experiences from Americans within World War II. So a much more refined search engine, and then asking it to sort those in terms of audience, popularity, just like that. I almost think of it as like a really, really smart assistant to help you sort of say, nah, these are the things that I'm going to look at and do the actual intellectual work with. So it made sense to me that might work, but I wasn't even confident in that moment that it would deliver results that were reliable for every student. So I left it just hanging as like, give it a shot and move on. And I actually think I did that because that was very shortly after they announced that they were opening up AI
in
schools. Yeah. And then I had done it earlier in the year, sort of just saying, if you have it on your phone and you want to use it for this activity in a very similar way, but I think it was just like a 1 day act, wasn't even like a part of a big project. It was just sort of like a 1 day activity on a block day.
In a very, very similar way means the other assignment was also kind of using AI to gather information to
gather and filter.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But not really to generate something that I was going to place any value on.
Did you have any initial expression as to initial impression as to how the students used AI and like how it affected their research process?
No, because I didn't pay close attention to that. It wasn't really a concern for me. So I don't know how many did, how helpful it was, any of that stuff. And they might have used it for more parts of the activity without me saying like, this is an improving to use of it. Or they might not.
What do you think is the best role for teachers to like kind of teach students what the proper role of AI should be in their learning?
No, I mean, I think it's really important that we model the sort of like intellectual tasks that we're asking students to adopt, not just the practices, but like if I'm trying to teach students how to make a good argument, I think it's important that I don't just sort of say, here's a worksheet about how to make an argument, but I like stand up in front of the room and like struggle with the ideas, struggle with the expression of it. illustrate that it's not perfect on first draft and that like,
That's two names with their
you know,
friends.
even a student can challenge my argument and force me to revise it and refine it. And that like, that's the thinking made public that then students can pattern match to. And, you know, the AI is doing it too quickly and too behind the box.
In the black box,
Yeah.
where it's impossible to see what's going on.
You can't see that process at all. And, you know, it arrives with a finished thing that may or may not be, you know, have some quality to it. But again, like, the finished thing is not like creating a finished thing is not the goal. It's the process, the instructions and the process to get to that. So that feels like, you know, the only answer I feel confident in around like my role is to constantly remind that whatever it is they're asking AI to do is something that they are capable of doing, and that it's not busy work. It's not a worthless task. It's something that is hard perhaps, and that you could get it wrong, but that when you do it well, you know, it's the exercise of thinking that makes us human, that like I think, you know, inherently brings pride.
Do you think there's any way that the school can change about their overarching objective or policies that can assist the implement of AI in classrooms?
I think that goes back to like the practical reality that like that's such a huge paradigm shift. And you know, most days I got 50 minutes with a group of 28. Without
Does anyone watch?
a real hesitant, you know, without the curriculum being explicit, and I wouldn't even know how to make this curriculum because it's such a moving target as to what AI is. But without a curriculum that is, here's how to use AI to help you, not to bypass the stuff that you need to do. I don't know how I would ever then use it as a tool to help me teach you as history. And so because I'm not, you know, like I have no training in AI, all that I know is like that which I picked up. I'm not even curious about it. Like I'm not an exciting first adopter or anything, early adopter. It's very unlikely that I'm going to be the source of the lesson that really effectively teaches students how to think critically about AI.
But do you think that the school can potentially implement a lesson to the students, teaching them about the proper use and ethics of AI, and then having
Optimistically, yes, but I feel like that falls under the same like SEL lesson, media literacy lesson, where because it's not
This person watched animals use grass.
grade that's going on a diploma, many students quickly recognize that it's like you ought to rather than you have to sort of teaching. So I would be hesitant. I wouldn't have much enthusiasm about a series of lessons that unless they're tied to some sort of like curricular objective, and I wouldn't even know what those objectives are that like should be sought after or who's qualified to teach them. I wouldn't immediately be excited if the school said, well, every student's need this, and so we're going to ask our social studies teachers to spend the first week of October doing AI directed instruction. Like we've done that before with like media literacy. And that feels a little bit more like because we're constantly encountering media as we study. And so it feels like a necessary component, not this thing that isn't essential. Like AI is an opportunity, but it's not essential. And so
in mythology, this character is known for battling
that's the rub that I would see. Like, optimistically, sure, somebody writes a really good lesson, they figure out how to teach it to students, that'd be great.
In the broader picture, what do you see as the future of AI and education?
That's a good question, because I think education, like we are, it feels like exiting an era of time where education was just good on its own, like socially valued for its own purpose. Be educated was just a goal. And I think partly because education has become so intertwined with economic opportunity. And then you start to think about it more critically about like which aspects of this education are providing dividends and economic opportunity. And then all of a sudden, a lot of things feel inconsequential. If you're not going into a STEM field, why do you need to take math after geometry? Yeah, it's like becomes this utilitarian notion about education. So like in the future, looking forward, like what is the role of AI in it? I think the bigger picture is like, what are people asking of educational institutions like public schools to equip young people to do? And I think that as much as English teachers and social studies teachers would have to hold on to the idea we're wanting people to just be good thinkers. I think it's hard to not see that many people in society, particularly I think because the sort of like moment that we're in where competing realities based on different claims of facts are contentious, and then schools become the like distributors of a version of the world that other people disagree with. And so it's become very politicized. This space to teach history and to teach English is to like teach a worldview that is at odds with the worldview that other people have embraced. So I think for a lot of reasons, those critical thinking classes are losing the support they used to have. And so AI becomes a quick way to just like
I can just go to Factoria and
let something else do your critical thinking. Which I think, like once you know how to do mathematical calculations in your head, I don't think anybody has a problem with you shortening the gap to do them on a calculator. But something's lost when people only know how to press the sequence of buttons and have no mental concept of what calculation they're performing,
Oh, wait, no, like,
where it relates to the larger world that answer is going to fit into.
So I think there are two questions that you brought up to people like like me who are investigating how to integrate AI into academia, and one of them being how to explain that integrating AI could be necessary for living. I think that's the point that you brought up. Say like calculators, they could be essential in some of the more difficult calculations. So is there any way that we can put a parallel in using AI in education versus using calculator in education? If there's a way that you could potentially draw a parallel to that, maybe that could answer how AI could be used in academia.
Yeah.
And I think the second question that you raised is what are institutions trying to equip the student with by integrating AI in their learning?
Yeah.
So that's the other half that
Yeah, I mean, those are sort of rhetorical questions that I don't have good, well considered answers to, or even like opinions on. I think like I mean, like the fundamental thing of like, we've been in this moment before. Oh, calculators, it's destroying math. And here we are, and now they're just like a helpful tool to get the average student to progress much further in math than they otherwise would have. And I don't know if AI is just the modern incarnation of the calculator. I think there is something different, because a calculator arrives reliably at a singular calculable conclusion over and over and over. So it's a replication of the same process. And generative AI is not that. Generative AI is creating a new
to come out with 5 books, I will head over to
outcomes that have the appearance of being originally generated. And so I don't know that it's a perfect match of like what it's,
Hey.
the threat that it poses to the learning process.
You guys cover me, sir.
I might not even be right, like totally right in my concept about generative AI. I think it like that's such a, like I've played around with ChatGPT, I've used Perplexity, I've done being image things, like that's the extent of and I think that like AI exists so far beyond that very consumer level point of access.
Mhm.
So that like, if AI is going to be integral to medicine development moving forward, I can't imagine that, schools who are studying biology are going to sidestep the role that AI plays in
And
scientific research.
that would be a case where school needs to prepare the students to equip them with a skill of AI to kind of push them into the field that they want to learn.
I don't know, like that's where I think of myself as a public school teacher as really not preparing people for jobs. Like that's a college level thing. I think I'm much more helping students develop their ability to think critically about things. And particularly within the social studies, think critically about the social world that we inhabit. And what they choose to do with that may have financial consequence. And it might just, allow them to better understand their neighbor or their spouse or their children or whatever down the line, to sort of like have gone through the process of thinking about this world beyond their own individual experience.
I want to lastly come back to your example that you have shown with the biotechnology company. So do you think that changes like integrating AI into academia, would this type of changes be or like will they originate by industry or by education? Because what you're explaining is a change in industry when medical developments requires AI, that will drive a change in the educational system, causing schools to adapt and integrate AI.
I don't know. I mean, like, does it descend down? I think what you're saying is, does it descend once it's being used at the cutting edge of innovation? Does it descend down and it become part of the standard toolkit that an undergraduate pre-med student is entertaining? And if that's the case, then do they have to wait until they're a freshman in college to start to use that toolkit?
I guess my question is, do you think this change will be motivated by the industry, or will it start from a change in the educational system and then affect the output?
I think I would be surprised if the educational system is the driver of it. Industry has all the incentive to explore possible revenue generators. So it's like, to the extent that it enables efficiencies that lead to profits, industry is going to pioneer them.
Also, another issue is since it was just one like huge friend group.
Yeah.
Like
Whether
wasn't
it's
like
for the
much
benefit
to
of
share. Like we get like a bag of junk.
any of us. Like there's a material sort of like measurement of like, it's cheaper, it's faster, but like industry has not proven itself really good at integrating the externalities into their cost equations and addressing the existential consequence of paradigm shifts.
I think this is where we'll end our interview.
Cool.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I will write a few things down because I have some immediate thoughts.
Yeah.
And then could I ask you about your feedback?
Sure. Yeah.
Once spring starts, I'll have sports. Alright, see ya.
See ya. This is what you call junior pessimism.
Hey, Nate,
Hi.
what do you think? Do you think do they call it like junior pessimism?
I honestly was so engaged with Tony that that happened and I didn't pay any attention.
They're not very optimistic about people coming and coming back.
Yeah,
Say
okay.
maybe we should switch to having meetings every other week. And I'd say it doesn't need to go that far. It's only the first.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think that the minute you switch it to every other week, it's hard for people to find a pattern
Yeah,
and it just drops off.
especially when sometimes we skip Mondays.
Yeah, I think that, you want to, like the snacks, witness this every time, like, oh, people will come for the snacks, but then they'll stop coming the minute you stop providing snacks. So I wouldn't lean into sort of like sugar incentives. I think that, a hardcore press amongst, your friends and classmates to sort of say like, hey, we're really trying to get this off the ground and like maybe take it in a slightly